So I'm saying there are those sort of ethical questions. How do we behave in the blogosphere? And people tell me there are sort of implicit ethics, to which my response is, they don't seem to be doing a terribly good job at the moment, granted some of what I see out there, in terms of sheer honesty, truthfulness, human wisdom, etc. But then beyond that again is the much larger question. Even if we all behave perfectly in terms of our actual interaction, are we actually building the Tower of Babel, or is this, in fact, a sort of new Pentecost, or an outworking of Pentecost, where different people, as was said, can come together and can share in totally new ways. And that brings me to the question of identity, and wrestle with questions of identity quite a bit. And I wrestle with it as a meta question. Why does the word identity loom so large in our contemporary discourse? How would you translate the word identity, say, back into New Testament Greek? And that's not just a sort of cheap biblical scholars put down. It's a way of saying, is there something here which we have elevated to more importance than it might actually have, not just in the New Testament, but in, say, Chrysostom or Aquinas or Calvin or whoever? And I simply don't know the answer to that. But if there is a question called identity to be asked, then presumably the theological answer is that as human beings we are given the identity of image bearers, which is not just reflecting God to God, but reflecting God out into the world. And the God we reflect is a God who communicates, a God who reveals what he's up to, but doesn't just communicate. He does things, has plans for what he's going to do, which he shares with human beings so that they can be part of the plan as well. And if that's who we fundamentally are, I suppose my question back to a digital age would be, how can these extraordinary gifts, discoveries, whatever, enable us to do that wisely, shrewdly, humanely, reflecting the rich diversity of God the Creator? You know, sometimes when I see what's now possible in the digital age, and I'm thinking music and image as well as words, I think this does have something about that prodigal carelessness almost of God. You know, does God play dice? I don't know, but he certainly makes whales and cucumbers and waterfalls and hippopotamuses and goodness knows what. God just seems to say, wow, let's do one of these. What about that? And somehow modernism has tamed the wild creativity of God. And if this is a way of saying, no, let's not do that, let's play, let's get out there, see what God's up to, then tremendous. That may be part of a very necessary move. I do sense myself, when Rich was talking about opportunities, even when I'm sitting at my laptop, which I know very intimately and which I see more than I see many human beings in many days, I still have a sense that I would get if, as a very amateur musician, I were to go and sit at the console of the organ in Durham Cathedral. Here is this massive thing capable of making this amazing music, and all I can play is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, or perhaps the very easiest of Bach's short preludes and fugues at the most. And I think that sense of untapped possibilities, and then also the slightly alarming thing, if I were to try to tap into even some of the possibilities that I don't tap into, just how much time would that take? Is that the right use of my time? Is that bought at or stolen at the expense of other things that I ought to be doing? So there's a question of vocation there. And it seems to me that just as I spend my days bouncing to and fro between pastoral work, taking services, confirmations and all that, preparing and preaching sermons, making speeches in the House of Lords, trying to write articles and books and things, and it's a constant battle. Am I called to do this today? How many hours should I be spending on this? So in the same way, if you're throwing something else into that mix, what's going to give? What's going to go? Or are there ways of doing any or all of those things which would be enhanced, speeded up appropriately, in ways that, writing, the advent of the computer just happened when I was maturing as a writer, and has enabled me to think more quickly, to get stuff out there more quickly, in ways that would have been unthinkable when I was a graduate student. Maybe the next generation is going to do things like that, speeding things up. Anyway, You all know this, and I don't need to say much more on that. Digital church, folk who wouldn't be comfortable, wouldn't feel comfortable in a church. Yeah, I understand that. Theological colleges sometimes play this exercise, don't they, of sending seminarians off with £5 to go and place a bet in a betting shop. And just tell them, go and bet on a horse. And most of them, of course, have never been in one of these places before. They come back and say, how was it for you? They say, I felt really strange. I went in, I didn't know what I was expected to do. And I went up nervously. And this is precisely how people feel when they come into a church. You know, this is an alien environment. And so I understand that for the great majority of the population, church is not a place they're terribly comfortable in. See it at weddings, you know. So if we can help people over that hump, that's fine. However, there's a big question underneath that, which is about the physicality of human life and the dangers of an implicit gnosticism within a world which enables you to reinvent a new self, a real self, a pseudo-real self, rather than the flesh and blood real self. You know, the real self that sleeps and sneezes and eats and defecates and all the rest of it. This is the stuff that God actually made. And if we abstract from that a real self in some other space, there's a problem about that. I remember 30 years ago when I was first on the Church of England Doctrine Commission, and the bishops used to bowl googlies at us and say, here's a question that's come up, what do you think about it? One evening we were faced with the question that ITV had written to the House of Bishops to say, how would it be if we broadcast a communion service on ITV, and if we encouraged people at home to get a piece of bread and a glass of wine and put them in front of the television screen, and then when the consecration happened, they would then be consecrated and people at home could share in the communion service. And that's a very interesting question, because thinking around the room, it was clear that virtually everybody, that almost everybody in the room, knew in their bones that the answer was no, actually, but articulating why was quite tricky. But ultimately it is to do with the physicality of a sacramental world which shares in the physicality of a real community world. And that to abstract from that physicality is actually to deny something of the essence of what sacraments are all about, and to deny something of the essence of what community is all about. That community actually involves looking people in the eye, being able to embrace and be embraced by them, to meet, to love, to be angry, to forgive, all of that stuff. And to abstract from that into some other space, if that's the word you want to use, seemed to us then, and I confess seems to me still now, to be a step in the direction of agnosticism that then laughs like the Jesus in the Gospel of Judas or whatever it is, laughs at these silly disciples for imagining that flesh and blood was actually the most important thing, whereas the Gnostic Jesus has risen above all that. That seems to be a real problem. In terms of including people, giving people a voice, well, yes, but, again, blogosphere, some of those voices are voices that actually should grow up, if they want to be heard, just mouthing off, talking trivia and rubbish. I think there is such a thing as human maturity, and to pretend that anyone just letting it all hang out is as good as anyone else is actually to sin from that wise discrimination which the New Testament constantly urges upon us.